Fourth lesson of this sixth unit of the events of the 20th century that shaped the world or shaped the future is going to be the Russian Revolution. We're actually going to backtrack a little bit here. We're going to be talking about the same time period as lesson one. But again, I wanted to isolate this one in particular because now that you know about the Cold War, we need to know how it all kind of happened on the bigger picture, I guess you would say. So you're going to notice that diplomacy, conflict here are not going to be a major thing, but the causes and effect, as always, are kind of the meat and potatoes of this lesson. And we're going to be talking about this whole thing as a whole is called the Russian Revolution, in my opinion. So here we go. We're going to get into two revolutions in this lesson. We're going to be talking about the February Revolution, which also has a couple of different names that go with it. This is what's going to overthrow their previous style of government, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. And then there's something called the October Revolution. I've called it some different things. You may know it as the Bolshevik Revolution or the Communist Revolution, but that's obviously what's going to make Russia the Soviet Union eventually. It's worth noting that this is happening during 1917, and you know that World War One's happening. We're not involved. The United States not involved yet, but I talked about the Russia dropping out, and this is why. So let's first talk about this February Revolution. People in the Russia were not happy. So these are all the protesters outside of where the king and his family live, Tsar Nicholas II and his family. And why are they protesting? They're hungry. They're in this square and they're just chanting, bread, bread, give us bread. At the same time, their cost of living was higher. So we saw before that when people are in times of war, you have to pay up for different products. Well, they didn't really have a whole lot of money to begin with, and to buy products that basically were substandard, I guess you would say. 1917 was actually a colder winter than normal in Russia, and it actually got to be so cold that the railroad ties that were actually staked into the ground are being blistered up. So they're popping up, and it's basically made travel very difficult. And all the while, they're getting their tails kicked during World War One. So they're going to show up, they're going to protest, and they're actually going to convince Tsar Nicholas II to drop out of World War One so they can kind of focus on themselves. However, this did not end well for the royal family. So Tsar Nicholas II and his children and his wife are actually going to be kidnapped, and then they're going to be executed because they took a lot of the blame for the condition of the country. Now, the thing that didn't help them is that Tsar Nicholas II's wife is actually from Germany. And when Nicholas goes out and visits troops on the front lines and he leaves her kind of in charge, yeah, that didn't go very well. So, like I said, long story short, they all get executed and they need a new government. And ironically, they actually switched to democracy, which they wanted to be in charge of their own fate. So good for them. So here's my first question to you. Prior to the February Revolution, Russia had what type of government? So, the second revolution, the October Revolution, this is where you're going to notice that the Soviet Union that we just got done talking about in the Cold War and World War II, you're going to see how it all came about. So, communism is actually a theory at this time. It hasn't been put into practice. And it was the brainchild of two people I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. But it was actually put into practice by this guy named Vladimir Lenin. He has this nationalistic view of the people should own land, they should have peace, and they should have bread. So, again, in tough times, when somebody comes in and starts preaching about how a better way of life is on the other side, if you would just believe in me, more times than not, that person's going to win. You just got to find that common enemy, I guess you would say. So, in this case, as I said before, communism is actually the brainchild of this guy, and his name is Karl Marx. He actually believes that there should not be any social classes. There should be social equality amongst everybody. Everybody is equal because everybody has nothing in this case. The land is everybody's to use, it's used to be shared, and so on and so forth. So, kind of that's why it gets crossed over into socialism. What makes communism communism is because when you get the government side into that, that's where it separates it out. But for our purposes, communism means common ownership. So again, all this was a theory until Vladimir Lenin came in and basically injected this into the Russian Empire, now making the Soviet Union. So, when communism is basically installed in the Russian Empire, this guy, or no, sorry, this guy, Vladimir Lenin, already kind of talked about him, is going to make these promises, and people are basically all upset that capitalism is failing, I guess you would say. So, democracy didn't really stand a chance. It was only in power, only in place for just a couple of months. And with us being the American citizens that we are, we understand that it's kind of an ongoing thing. You just got to kind of take the good with the bad. But they wanted results, and they wanted it now. So again, when he comes in and he's saying that everybody gets peace, everybody gets land, and everybody gets bread, desperate people are going to say, "Crap, yeah, I want that." So that's how communism basically made its way to the Russian Empire. And wouldn't you know it, that Vladimir Lenin, he did not follow through with what he was saying. So when he was preaching everything, he was talking about how land is going to be returned to the people. It wasn't. It was actually returned to the government. So the government took ownership of a lot of things. He made everybody equal, but again, he made everybody equally bad. The common expression or the common example I use when I describe this is that in the United States in capitalism, brain surgeons make $1 million, let's say, ditch diggers make $20,000. Now, in communism, brain surgeons and ditch diggers get paid the same amount of money. So even though the ditch digger thinks I'm going to make $1 million, it's really the brain surgeon's going to be making $20,000, if you will. So that's kind of the quick version of all that. But again, it wasn't just land; it was factories, it was private businesses, it was just everything became property of the state. So, question for you: prior to the October Revolution, Russia had what type of government? So here is where we're actually going to switch it up a little bit. There is a article on Canvas that I want you to find, and I want you to read it. Okay, it's titled "Upfront: How the Russian Revolution Changed the World," and there's actually a quiz that is followed right after it. So if you follow my thought here, so you go into Canvas, and then here is the class. You go into modules, and it is right here up front: How the Russian Revolution Changed the World. And here is the quiz that goes with it. So give it a read, answer the questions, and get your points.